Some of you may be aware that social media has popularized the term languishing to describe how we're feeling during this pandemic. And when I first heard the term languishing, I immediately thought of upper-class Victorian women trapped in too tight corsets and crushing social norms who can't breathe and so spend much of their time languidly lying on green velvet couches. And I think that is kind of a good term for right now because we are trapped in too tight homes in a crushing pandemic that takes our breath away. And so we spend a lot of time languidly lying on couches watching Netflix. Languishing can be characterized as a sense of a bit of stagnation, a bit of emptiness, of sort of walking slowly through molasses. It's not burnout, it's not depression, but it's kind of a medium state of feeling just kind of lost. We're not sunk down into the depression, but we're not flourishing either. We function, but we're not at full capacity. Our concentration wanders. It's a little hard to get our enthusiasm up for anything. And languishing is a normal human condition. It's after experiencing a loss or a huge change or this global pandemic, you start in initial intense feelings like grief and fear and anxiety. And then as psychologist Adam Grant says, that early acute state of anguish gives way to this more chronic condition of languish. And it's a well-known human state. Early Christians called it acedia, a state of listlessness and apathy. And acedia was of great concern among the North African desert monastic communities. This is where acedia most often arose in monks because it's the solitary nature of their existence made it more common. And it could even lead to monks abandoning their religious vows. And in the early 5th century, the monk Cassian wrote that a mind seized by this emotion is disgusted with his room and cannot stay still in his cell, nor devote himself to his devotions. He glances about and sighs that no one is coming to see him, and he looks at the sun as if it were too slow in setting. And I think under lockdown orders, so many of us solitary, our days blurring together, it's no wonder we might be suffering from acedia or languishing. We've all become inadvertent monks this past year. And especially now, when we were just getting that bit of hope with vaccines being rolled out and stores reopening, our souls were starting to expand out into the world, seeking new experiences and old friends. And then the variants have hit us hard and we've had to shrink back down into our monastic cells and go back to waiting a little longer. So here we are, many of us sick of our homes and sighing because no one ever visits and that stupid sun takes forever to set. We languish. Now, one of the concerns about feeling this way is that it can dip down into depression. Without even noticing, it can get worse and worse. And so it's important to check in with ourselves and name our feelings, because when an experience can be named, we can communicate about it and share it. And as people of the chalice, our fourth principle calls us to the search for truth and meaning, and that includes our inner truth. So for those of you who are languishing, give yourself permission to name these feelings when asked, "How are you?" And you just might hear, "Me too," in response. Because naming how we're feeling, sharing it, reminds us we are not alone in this condition. Languishing is absolutely normal. There's nothing wrong in experiencing it. You are not failing at life. Most people will experience it at some point or even multiple times over the course of their life. Apathy and slowness are normal, and it's fine to feel this way. I actually think languishing happens when the way forward, when there's been a big change and the way forward is not yet clear. Something's gone and the next thing's not yet here. And so we become in this in-between time, that medium place where we're really not sure what's going on. So I encourage you to be okay with languishing if that's where you're at. Let yourself go at the pace of your spirit if your spirit's moving a little slowly. and just keep looking for those things that pull you forward and outward. The early monks fought acedia through praying, crying, and simply enduring it until it let up. And while we're all enduring, and I know that I've done my share of crying and possibly praying, if praying looks a lot like swearing, we do have other options too. We have that example of all those languishing Victorian ladies who finally started loosening the corsets and take up bicycling. Finding those small goals and creative activities help. Getting lost in the flow, that state of absorption in a particular moment or a small meaningful challenge, that can really help. So TV binges where you get absorbed in the story and care for the characters, that really works. Baking or knitting or building something that pulls you out of yourself into the creative process. A long bike ride engages your mind and body, or singing a beautiful song. That experience of creative flow pulls you out of yourself into the beauty of life that's still around you, and it recharges your spirit. Episcopalian priest Barbara Brown Taylor calls these experiences answers to the question, what is saving your life right now? And Taylor says for her, her life depends on engaging in the ordinary acts of living with great attention. They open her up and pull her out of herself into that flow state. And so I'd like you to think about your own life. What is saving you right now? Is it a chat with an old friend or the blossoms that are appearing on the cherry tree? And we're going to take a few minutes for you to consider what's saving your life, what has brought you alive in the last few weeks, what's affirming and alive, and you're welcome to share it in the chat. And I'm going to encourage you to be as specific as you can. It's fine that there's small things. And if you're in the thick of acedia, you might not have anything to share, and that's fine. And as you type in the chat, Kathleen and I will take turns reading the words aloud. It's good to hear about those lovely little ordinary events and experiences that lift our spirits and remind us that life is still good. And while we've been talking about languishing as this sort of painful way of being to be endured, a state we should seek to end as quickly as possible, I'm really, as I think about it, not so sure it's that problematic. It is, after all, a normal, ordinary human condition. Monks were worried about it 1,500 years ago. It's this being in a middle place. And I think it can actually bring its own gifts. As Unitarian Universalists, we try to embrace being human with all of its ups and downs and acknowledge that emotions, intense and difficult as they may be, they're not inherently bad or wrong. They're telling us something about the state of our being. And as I said before, I think languishing tells us we're in this in-between time, this pause and stillness. What comes next has not yet arrived. We're all still waiting for that post-pandemic life, that new normal that we're so looking forward to when we can come out of our houses again. Writer Kathleen May uses that term wintering to talk about a similar state to languishing, that time when things feel off and life's a struggle. And I like this idea because wintering's a natural state. Winter arrives even when we don't want it to. And it can be bleak and harsh, but it has its own joys. The crisp beauty of winter, the crisp beauty of the cold, the paring back to essentials, that welcoming dark that encourages sleep and rest and quiet. Winter has a slowness that has its own power. If we think of languishing as wintering, a season to journey through, then perhaps we can sort of embrace its strengths a little, even while we struggle through the hard parts of it. We don't have to fight it or condemn ourselves for how we feel, but accept it, knowing that spring never fails to arrive. Wintering slowness and solitude lets us pay attention to our spirits and the world around us. It gives us space to see the small things that can save us. And it gives us time and opportunity to get absorbed into all those ordinary small things that are saving our lives. So over the months I was away, I definitely felt that languishing and that wintering, but eventually I was able to reach renewal. My soul began to unfurl like a fern towards the light, not by any one big thing or big moment, but just by those many little things, baking bread, walking in the woods, watching the flames flicker in a wood stove, writing and wondering, all small good things. Winter is always followed by spring, and we will get there eventually. And so one of the things I want to lift up today is just a story about a small good thing. Last April, during the first shutdown in England, there is an older man who lives in an apartment near a canal. And a duck arrives one day on his balcony and decides to nest in his planter that has a fuchsia plant in it. But the balcony happens to be on the 9th floor. So it's kind of high up from the canal and perhaps not the wisest move. But the duck, who the man names Mrs. Mallard, decides it's the place to build her nest and lay her eggs. And it turns out she's actually a very smart duck because the man is a lifetime member of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. He is delighted she has chosen his balcony. He's retired. He's trapped in his apartment. He's got time. And so he becomes the duck protector. He rearranges everything on the balcony to keep her safe. He seals up gaps at the bottom of the railing that might allow a newly hatched duckling to fall. He pins old maps on his windows so that he doesn't disturb her while he's walking about his living room. And he makes a plan for when the ducklings hatch because he knows they cannot get safely down 9 floors to the canal on their own. And he has to change his sleep habits so that he'll be awake because duck eggs hatch early in the morning. And so at 5 a.m. one morning last May, 7 ducklings are safely hatched. And when Mrs. Mallard is ready, the man puts the babies in a bucket and he lowers the bucket by a very long rope 9 floors down the side of his building. And then he races down to get them out of the bucket so that they can follow Mrs. Mallard safely to the canal, which they do. Imagine rearranging your life to protect a duck. It's so lovely and kind, and it brought the duck protector himself great joy. And all the people who've been reading about it on Twitter, thousands of us who have just loved this story. And this year, another year into the pandemic, Mrs. Mallard came back, and this year there's 11 eggs waiting to hatch. The duck should appear this week, and you can follow #OperationMallard on Twitter for the big exciting news. And it's such a small story, but it brings such a smile to my face because it really, I think, speaks to that beauty of bringing your caring attention to the world, that all these marvelous little good things are happening even in the midst of the larger horrors of the pandemic. And it's a gift, this gift of life, of spring returning, that no matter what the winter has done, we can return to the glorious aliveness of life. When we're ready, spring is offering us goldfinches and cherry blossoms, tomato seedlings and ducklings. Our spirits unfurl and spring welcomes us in. The pandemic will end, not soon enough and not without loss, but the world will open up again. If you're languishing, it's okay. Winter's just hanging on a little hung in your heart. Just keep naming it and caring for yourself and finding ways to get absorbed into the world through music, baking, or taking care of a duck. It is just a season. Spring will return to your spirit. The pandemic will end. Life remains good. So say we all.